Hi, everybody. Um, Welcome back to MarshWatch. And after our break next week, it's good to see some folks back again for our seventh session. We're going through a few random species today. It's going to be a little bit of a catch-all. Um, as usual, I am coming to you today from Mi'kma'ki, which is the land of the Mi'kmaq people. And as usual, as well, we're going to be talking about species of birds and amphibians that are found throughout Newfoundland and Labrador, which are the lands of the Inuit, Innu, Mi'kmaq, and previously the Beothuk. And for anyone who is interested in learning about the lands they're living on, I would recommend checking out nativeland.ca. For anyone who's new this evening, I'm Jenna McDermott. I'll be your presenter. My colleague, Catherine Dale, is here as well. She's manning the chat and making sure I don't accidentally close the meeting when my computer dies. Um, so we both work for Birds Canada, which is a national nonprofit organization whose mission is to engage people through science to protect the birds we love. And MarshWatch is just one of many programs that we have. We do have several different programs that people can volunteer to collect bird data that can go towards conservation and bird management. And so if you're interested in any learning more about those, feel free to get in touch with us or check out the Birds Canada website. Our agenda today is a whole bunch of small things. So we'll be doing a few birds, a couple of amphibians. I'll go over how to make a MarshWatch checklist. And then we'll have a short little quiz at the end as well. So all of that will be recorded as usual, except for I'll take out the quiz section and not post that online. We are only doing 6 species tonight. So we have 4 birds, bank swallow, tree swallow, olive-sided flycatcher, cedar waxwing, and then we're finishing off our amphibians, the American toad and spring peeper. Next week, we will still have some more birds to get through. So we have more to look forward to after this week as well. Our first species of the evening is the bank swallow. So we have the 2 swallow species. Swallows as a grouping are part of what we call aerial insectivores. And aerial insectivores is just a fancy way of saying animals that eat insects that are flying while they are flying. So bank swallows and other swallow species are going to be spending most of their time flying around on the wing, catching insects and eating those as they go. And so that's sort of a key mark of a bank swallow and other swallows is that they're basically always flying around. They're not really going to be found on the ground very much. And the bank swallow is Canada's smallest swallow. Now, comparing a swallow without a whole bunch of them together is obviously difficult, but swallows do often group together during foraging or migration. So sometimes you can get large groupings of them with different species mixed in. So if you have a bunch together, you might be able to pick out the bank swallow being the smallest one. It does have, in general shape, a tiny bill, which is usual for swallows, long pointed wings, and a slightly forked tail, which is difficult to see, but in certain certain positionings, you'll be able to see that, especially if it's flying overhead, which is often how we see a lot of the swallows as they go by. So bank swallows are very good at flying. They have a lot of aerial acrobatics. Because they are spending so much time feeding on the wing, they can sort of swoop and dive and spend a lot of time in the air. They're quickly turning corners, that sort of thing. And that is to do as well with these slender pointed wings that really give them a lot of versatility while they're flying. So males and females look the same. They're both brown over top. And then if you see them from underneath, which you often will, they are white underneath, a nice white throat, a full white belly and undertail, but then they have this very evident brown chest band that goes straight across the chest from armpit to armpit, basically. And that is the best way to tell a bank swallow from other swallow species in our region. There won't be any others that have that breastband. So That's the key mark for bank swallow. As they're flying by, you can hear them making an interesting call that they have, and they do that call in flight for the most part, and it's sort of a harsh guttural call. I'll let you listen to it. So both males and females will make those calls as they fly by. And bank swallows generally fly with a very fluttery kind of behavior. They don't do a lot of gliding in between flaps, so they are almost a little bit bat-like in their flight. If you take a look at that picture on the top left, that's a fledgling bank swallow. So it's a baby one just come out of the nest kind of recently. And you can see they are a little bit lighter brown edged on the wings and have that very classic baby bird, super fluffy feathers. You likely won't get a chance to see a whole bunch of fledgling bank swallows, but it's a pretty cute picture either way. Um, as I mentioned, bank swallows are aerial insectivores, so that means they're eating insects, and specifically flying insects. So they're flying around, they're catching things like ants, bees, and wasps, um, flies of different sorts, beetles, mayflies, that sort of thing. And they'll eat them while they're flying and also bring them back to their nests to feed to their youngsters, which you can see in the bottom right photo. Bank swallows have a really interesting nesting requirements. So much like their name would indicate, they make their nests in steep banks, sandy and soft steep banks. They are typically over 70 degrees in steepness. And they will dig out these holes to make their nest in. So they actually dig with their beak and feet and wings to excavate these burrows, and there will be one pair using each burrow. And they will nest in large colonies. They can be truly gigantic, up to 2,000 nests together, but that would be really the high end of things. Typically, they're not quite nearly that big. And sometimes they are very obvious, these burrow holes, like you could see on the bottom left photo, but sometimes the holes are less obvious, like the main photo I have circled there, an individual going into a burrow in a bank in Newfoundland. And so sometimes they're super obvious, but sometimes they are not quite as obvious. And these banks can be along coastlines or along rivers, so they can be freshwater or saltwater. Even though they use only these banks for nesting in, they will feed over a more variable landscape. So as long as it's a pretty open area, they'll use that area to collect these insects that they're feeding on. And so they'll feed over things like lakes and ponds, rivers and streams, as well as drier areas like meadows and fields and pastures, and then bogs and other peatlands as well. So because they are nesting in these very steep, soft banks, they their colonies are quite vulnerable to erosion. And so this is obviously a natural process, but that means that year to year, colonies can move locations, or individuals will come back to the same location and have to dig out a burrow again because their old burrow has likely fallen off with erosion. Bank swallows are one of the most widely distributed birds in the world. And so, as you can see, they're found on all continents throughout the year, other than Australia and Antarctica, which I don't even have on the map here. And they are called bank swallows in North America, but if you are outside of North America, it's the same species, but they are known as the sand martin. If we look in closer at North America here, you can see that they breed quite widespread, and they go south for the wintering season, and then they are found throughout Labrador in the southern areas, and mostly in western Newfoundland, and they do go a little bit farther up the northern peninsula in western Newfoundland, but they aren't really found too much central and eastern. Bank swallows are a listed species federally. They're listed as threatened. They don't have a listing in Newfoundland and Labrador. And bank swallows, as I said again, are aerial insectivores, and a lot of the aerial insectivore species are a species at risk. As a group, they've experienced really steep declines over the last several decades, and a lot of that is due in part to a loss of um, foraging, food availability, because there has been less insects, declines in insects as well. And so their food source has become less available. And they are also dealing with loss of breeding and foraging habitat, um, with development and other human causes. And then they're also dealing with the impacts of climate change for several different reasons. Um, one of which is, changes in food availability, based on the timing that the insects will hatch out and the timing that they are breeding. So typically those would be timed together, but with climate change, that sort of become mismatched. It's called phenological mismatch. And then also with climate change, we're seeing, stronger storms, more frequent storms, storm surges, that sort of thing. And so that can cause quicker erosion of their habitat that they need, of course, to breed in. If we move on to our next swallow species, the tree swallow, it's another aerial insectivore. So again, it's going to be spending a lot of time flying around catching insects. And it has the general shape and size that is similar to the bank swallow. It has that short bill, it has long tapered wings, and it also has a slightly forked tail as well, which you can see when it's in flight. And it has little short legs. The tree swallow does look a little bit fancier though than the bank swallow. Both the males and the females have an iridescent blue head and back. And so obviously in certain lights, it's not going to be quite as bright and shiny as these photos here, but they do have this iridescent blue. And the females are also blue, but if they're a bit younger, they can sometimes be a bit more brownish or less iridescent than the males. They also have a little bit of a black mask around their eye, and then underneath they're fully white. So the bank swallow had that band across the breast, but the tree swallow is fully white underneath. Tree swallows make a sort of high-pitched, kind of liquidy mixture of noises as they're flying. And so they'll make those noises as they fly overhead, or around where they're breeding. And so you'll hear them if they're nearby. Tree swallows are relatively common breeders in Newfoundland and Labrador. Um, and so you can see them in a variety of mostly open habitats, and that's often associated with bodies of water as well. So they'll use areas like marshes and wooded swamps or beaver ponds, and they'll be over peatlands as well, sometimes foraging, looking for insects. They're aptly named as well because they do use natural cavities in trees to nest in. So you can see that photo on the bottom right. The little nestlings are sticking their head out of the tree cavity as the parent comes to get them a snack. And so they will use these natural tree cavities, but they will also very happily use human-made nest boxes. And that makes them a really ideal study species for researchers because you can sort of watch them throughout the breeding season and see really what's going on with them. And if you have any questions about that sort of thing, Catherine is a great person to ask because she has, in fact, studied tree swallows as well. As I mentioned, they are aerial insectivores, so they're flying around, eating insects while they're flying, which you can see on the bottom left there. And so they'll take basically anything that they can get their beaks around in the air, and then they will also eat some other small prey, things like spiders, roundworms, and mollusks, which are mostly snails, because they need extra calcium during the breeding season for creating eggs. Tree swallows are very widely found across North America. They breed quite far north into the Arctic as well, and they winter down in Central America. We do see them throughout most of southern Labrador, and we do also see them in Newfoundland on the island, even though they're not on this range map. But this is the eBird abundance, and they are found across the island, and probably also in that more southern hole there. There's just not a lot of birders down there, of course, so there's no records of tree swallows. Okay. Away from swallows, but still in aerial insectivores, we have the olive-sided flycatcher. Flycatchers are also eating insects on the wing, but they typically feed by what is called sallying. So they'll be sitting on a branch, they'll fly out, catch an insect, and then fly back to the branch and eat it there. So they sally out to get some insects. Um, and they have this classic flycatcher type bill, which is broad and has a little tiny hook on the end. So the olive-side flycatcher has that broad flycatcher bill. They are a very dignified looking bird. They sit with a very upright posture on a branch. So a lot of birds will sit sort of hunched forward or in a more horizontal stance. Flycatchers and olive-side flycatchers specifically sit very upright. And they also hold their feathers on their head in such a way that they look like they have a bit of a peak on their head as well. The olive-side flycatcher, male and female, both look the same. So they're this kind of brownish olive gray over top, all the way from the head to the tip of the tail. And then from underneath, we see they have a clean white throat, a white belly, and then the most important marker for an olive-side flycatcher is that dark olive gray vest that they have on. So like two olive sides on the side of their front. And they make um, a very recognizable song, which is really nice. It also travels super far, so you can hear it from really far away and know that there's an olive-side flycatcher somewhere around. And a lot of people describe it as saying, "Quick, 3 beers." So if you want to make some sort of vague connection with with how they look and their song, you could say that it's a person wearing a vest going to the bar and ordering beer. And so they're saying, "Quick, 3 beers." So that's the olive-side flycatcher's song. The olive-side flycatcher sometimes shows a bit of a white patch on its sides above the tail. So you can see that I just circled it in yellow there. There's like a little white patch showing. That's often hidden by the wing, but sometimes it is sticking out. So just so if you see that, you don't get confused that it's a different species. Um, Olive-side flycatchers are associated a lot of the time with open areas of boreal forest. So they're really like the kind of edges between the wooded section and the open section. So a lot of the time that's a bog or a fen, a wetland of some other sort, or also burned or flooded or partially cut areas. And so these open areas often create a lot of nice dead standing trees, old snags, and they use those to sit on top of and do that quick 3 beers song that travels really far. And they love to sit up on those trees and also sally out for insects from there. So they are also eating basically any insect they can find that's flying around, things like wasps and bees, dragonflies, beetles, moths, and many different types of flies. Olive-sided flycatchers have this pretty interesting distribution across North America, and we do find them throughout Newfoundland and Labrador, but mostly in the southern sections of Labrador, a little bit more than this map would indicate, but not really up farther north. and they migrate to South America for non-breeding season. I will note that there are other species of flycatcher in the province and in the region more widespread. Um, Flycatchers can look really similar. Luckily, the olive-side flycatcher I think is the most different of the bunch. If you take a look at these other options, the yellow-bellied flycatcher, least flycatcher, and older flycatcher, they all have really evident bars, light bars on their wings, which the olive-side flycatcher doesn't have. It's far more muted bar or no bar at all. So that's a really good way to tell. They're also quite a bit bigger than these other species, and also a really good way of telling flycatchers apart generally is by song because they can look quite similar. So the olive-side flycatcher does have that really nice, distinctive quick 3 beers song. And this is another species that is listed at risk. So federally, it is listed as special concern in 2023, and that's actually a downlisting from threatened, which it used to be. And provincially in Newfoundland and Labrador, it is still listed as threatened. And this is because the population declined by 78% between 1968 and 2006. But that decline seems to have slowed sort of recently, which is why it got downlisted federally. It does have some major threats, one of which is habitat loss in their wintering grounds down south. And then food availability, we're still talking about that lack of insects that we've seen for the other aerial insectivores as well. Okay, moving away from aerial insectivores, we will go on to this beautiful bird, the cedar waxwing. I always think it looks kind of tropical and really fancy. It has a lot of marks that are very distinct to it, so we'll just start from the top and go down to the bottom. So it's sort of a medium-sized songbird. It's not as big as a robin, but definitely bigger than a sparrow. Um, it has that really smooth black mask on its face. And if you get a good look at it, you can see it's also edged in a little bit of white that makes it stand out even better. They have a big crest on top of their head. They can hold that up, or they often have it pushed back like that. Um, and then their coloration is sort of tan or brown along their head and breast, and then that sort of moves down gradually into gray along the back and the wings. Um, and then they have a bright yellow belly. You'll see that a little bit better on the next slide as well, since these birds are facing a bit away. But bright yellow belly. And then they also have sort of this bright highlighter yellow tip of their tail, which is very bright and easy to see. You'll notice that they also have these red little tips at in the middle of the wing. And those are a waxy secretion, so that's how they get their name, waxwing. And when they have them, when they do have them, they're very distinctive, but not all individuals show that waxy tip, so it's not the best ID marker in case they don't have it. Cedar waxwings often go around in groups, and they make a very high-pitched squeaking noise. I'll just let you listen to that. So both the males and the females make that sound, and they do it while they're perched or while they're flying. So you can get a glimpse of a group of them making that while they're flying by sometimes. And cedar waxwings, here you can see their yellow bellies a little bit better. So they do tend to travel around in flocks sometimes, especially when it's not the middle of the breeding season, and they make those super high-pitched calls. And they can descend in a big flock onto a bush or a shrub or a tree that has berries on it and just sort of strip all those berries off. And so a lot of the birds that we've talked about so far are insectivorous, eating insects, but cedar waxwings are actually frugivorous, which means they're eating mostly fruit. And so they're eating a lot of different berries, like serviceberry, raspberry, dogwood berries, crab apples, cedar berries, but they will also eat insects if they come across them, to get some protein in there. If you want to try and remember that their super high-pitched sound is maybe like screaming for sherbet, sorbet, or however you say that word. Like we scream for ice cream, they scream for fruit. Um, Okay. They do a really cute little courtship behavior. The males and females, which you can see in the bottom left photo, the male will pick a piece of fruit or other food offering and offer it to the female, and she'll take it and hold it in her mouth and sort of walk or hop away a little bit, and then come back and offer it back to him, and he'll take it and do the same thing, and they'll do that back and forth a couple of times until finally she'll take it and munch it up, and accept the offering. So that's just a cute little thing that sometimes you can see them doing. They also will eat fruit that has been on the tree over the winter, and into later in the fall when sometimes it's gotten a little bit fermented. So sometimes you could see a group of drunk waxwings because they've had a little bit too much fermented fruit to eat. Because they're fruit eaters, cedar waxwings will breed later in the season than a lot of the other species that we've talked about. Because most of the other species are timing their chicks hatching with sort of the biggest outbursts of insects, but the cedar waxwings are timing their breeding season with the ripening of fruit, which is later in the summer. You'll find cedar waxwings in wooded areas, not really in the middle of forests, but they do need treed areas to build their nests, and they are often adjacent to swamps or other wetlands, and they like to build their nests in deciduous trees a lot of the time. They're well hidden you could just see a little cedar waxwing eye poking out from the hidden nest. They'll also use more open areas, and drier areas like fields and grasslands, as well as urban areas, as long as there's enough fruit trees around for them to successfully feed. Cedar waxwings don't get too far north, but they are found from east to west, and down into a lot of the states as well during the summer. So we don't find them really in Labrador. It's a little bit too far north for them, but we do find them across Newfoundland in the summer. As they are a very easily distinguished bird, they of course have a look-alike, um, which is the Bohemian waxwing, which is the one on the right here. But there are some really good cues to tell them apart. During the winter time is when we usually see Bohemian waxwings coming out east, and they'll often be in mixed flocks with cedar waxwings. So if you get a group of those squeaking birds go by, and you take a closer look, you might see that there's a couple of Bohemian waxwings mixed in. The best way to tell them apart, or a couple of the best ways to tell them apart, is to look at the feathers under the tail. So on the cedar waxwing, those feathers are white. On the Bohemian waxwing, the feathers under the tail are this chestnut brown. And the belly of the cedar waxwing is yellow, whereas it's kind of gray or white on the Bohemian waxwing. And then generally the colors of the body are browner and yellower for the cedar, and they're grayer and whiter for the Bohemian waxwing. The Bohemian waxwing also has this really brilliant white wing bars. So just be aware that the Bohemian waxwing also does exist. Onward to our amphibians for the night. So we have the American toad, which is the only toad that we're talking about for our region. Across Canada and North America, there are other species of toads, but the American toad is the only one we're finding in the province. Pretty large amphibian, grows around bigger than 4 inches, so it's like quite a handful. Um, some are smaller, of course, when they're younger. And like we've talked about with many of our amphibians, their body color is pretty variable. So they could be a lot of natural sort of colors from brown, tan, gray, red, like the one on the bottom right, or olive color, or colors in between. But American toads are easy to tell apart from frogs anyway because they have a general sort of warty appearance. So they're kind of lumpy with all of these little quote unquote warts on them. These lumps aren't actually warts, and you're not going to get warts by touching a toad. The lumps are special skin glands that produce toxins so that if something tries to eat them or pick them up, they're going to get a bad taste in their mouth of this toxin, and ideally for the toad, sort of let them go again. So the American toad is generally warty, but an important note for identifying them compared to other toads is that inside of a dark blotch, inside of one of these black rings, there's only one or two of those warts. Other species will have more of those warts inside of a dark patch. They do often have a light line down the center of their back, and that's not present all the time, but is obviously on this two individuals here on this slide. And if you see them from underneath for whatever reason, they have a white belly with dark spots. And then another key mark for the American toad is that the cranial crest makes a V behind their eye. So I'll invite you to look at the little diagram that's in the middle here of the toad's head. So you can see its eyes there, and behind the eyes, there's these two sort of V's or L's, which are the cranial crests, those raised bumps that are along that part of their head. And they also have these really big parotoid glands, which are also those major toxin producing glands. And so for the American toad, the cranial crest is in this V or L shape behind the eyes. They don't touch each other and they don't touch the parotoid gland. And so if you keep that in mind, you'll be able to know that you have an American toad and not any other species of toad in Canada. The American toad makes a very monotone trilling sound. It can be really long. I think this recording might be 20 seconds or something like that. It has sort of a lower introductory note, and then in a large chorus, each of the males will actually make a slightly different note. That's just so that they can tell each other apart and females can tell individuals apart. And so this is one individual making its trill. As you can hear, it just keeps going on. It's quite long. And so if you have several individuals calling, that will obviously overlap with each other. I mean, you'll just have this constant wave of trilling noise. And they can be quite loud. They call pretty early in the season, as early as probably May or whenever water is coming open. The American toad is not very picky about what habitat it lives in outside of the actual breeding time. And so they'll be found in a lot of different terrestrial habitats. So you can find them inside the forest, in a grassland, in the middle of a bog or other peatland, or even in a rocky barren. And they do still need water for breeding because the eggs need to be laid in water so that they can hatch. And they'll use either permanent or temporary water for that. So they'll use a lot of our wetlands like marshes, bogs, fens, and swamps, amongst others, or edges of ponds and that sort of thing as well. And the eggs will be laid in water by the female. And you can see a picture of the eggs down the bottom middle there. They come in a long strand, that can be several meters long, and that is compared to all of the frog species, which lay the eggs in sort of globular masses rather than in a string. So that's a sort of interesting thing to know. If you see a bunch of eggs in the water, you can at least tell if it's a frog or a toad. Hmm. Toads can travel 2 kilometers between a breeding site and a foraging site, so they do travel quite far. And they are nocturnal, so you won't necessarily see them moving around a lot in the middle of the day, but if you're out in the evening or at night, then you might come across a lot of them on the road, or along the trail, that sort of thing. And they do have thicker, less permeable skin than frogs. So all the frogs that we've talked about have really thin skin, so they need to stay moist basically all the time. American toads can last longer without water, and don't dehydrate as quickly, so that's how they can be found in more of these variable habitats. Hmm. If you take a look at the map down here, the American toad is really an eastern North American species. They are found all throughout Labrador, even really far up north. And if you remember back from when we introduced amphibians for these sessions, they were introduced to the island of Newfoundland. And that was only in the 1960s to the Corner Brook area on the west coast there, where you can see that it has some orange on the map. And they have spread more since then, and so they're pretty widespread across the island now, not just in that western section. Okay, on to our um, last species for the day, the spring peeper. The spring peeper is a really tiny little frog. If you look at the picture on the bottom there, on that person's thumb, it's really mini. It's only around an inch and a half long, so quite different compared to the toad that we just talked about. Hmm. But again, like most of these amphibians, the body color is very variable. It can be a lot of different colors like tan, brown, green, or gray. But the most important thing is, amongst all of its markings, is that they always have this dark X along their back. Spring peepers have an X. Additionally, they have banded dark bands on their legs, the front and the back. They also have a dark V that goes between the eyes. It's a pretty shallow V, I have to say, but there it is. And if you see them from underneath, they are smooth and pale. And their hind feet don't really have any webbing, which is quite different compared to the other frog species that we looked at a couple of weeks ago. And the spring peeper is a tree frog, so they spend a lot of time up in the vegetation, climbing on branches and leaves. And so they do have little toe pads, and they're a bit tricky to tell or see on these pictures, but they have a little sort of enlarged end of the toe, and it helps them sort of stick to those surfaces that they're walking up on. The spring peeper is quite an early caller in the spring, which is why they're the spring peeper. They typically start calling right as the snow melts, and that's because they have the same cryogenic properties as the wood frog does. So if you remember, the wood frog puts extra glucose in their blood to keep their cells from bursting when they freeze over the winter. The spring peeper has the same thing, so they'll just um, spend the winter underneath of logs or leaf litter, that sort of thing. They'll essentially freeze for the winter, and then when they thaw in the spring, they are ready to go and start peeping. So the males will gather around the edge of a pool and they call from an elevated perch there, and they make this really loud peeping sound. So each individual just does one peep at a time, but that was a chorus of several of them. And they're really a nice sound to hear when you're out in the spring. Here you can see a photo up on the top there of a spring peeper mid-call. So it's got the vocal sac inflated to help reverberate that sound more loudly. They are mostly active at dawn and dusk, like a lot of our amphibians. You're going to be hearing them in the early morning or just before dark and into the evening. And even though they do crawl up on leaves and trees and vegetation, they're typically found still less than a meter above the ground. So they're not going way up into the canopy or anything like that. Because they are using these perches for calling, they are found in forested or shrubby areas. They spend a lot of the daytime hiding in leaf litter, but then if they're doing their calling, they're coming out near the edge of the water. And they do only need temporary woodland ponds to breed in. And so the eggs are laid and hatch, um, and the tadpoles turn into frogs all within 3 months. So they can use little ponds in the forest that are drying up later in the summer. And that's sort of the key area that you'll find them in is those little temporary woodland ponds. If you take a look at the map, you'll see we don't have them on the island of Newfoundland at all. And there is just a little population in the middle of Labrador by Happy Valley Goose Bay. And that was only recorded in 1998. Before that, there hadn't been um, any recordings of Spring Peeper in the province. And there could potentially be a broader distribution of them in Labrador, but there hasn't really been any amphibian surveys done widespread around. So there could be some more around, but they haven't been recorded. So they have a kind of a really disjunct population there, apart from being an eastern species in the rest of North America. Alrighty. So that's it for our species for today. I'm just going to spend the next probably 10 minutes or so talking about how to make a MarshWatch checklist. So, of course, we've been going through all of these species, learning how to identify them by sight and sound. But of course, the best way to learn is to go outside and actually be with the birds and the amphibians. And it's really a great time actually to start as spring comes around and things start to melt because you won't have as many species at the same time. So if you start going out to your wetlands nearby, earlier in the season, you'll just get a few new species at a time, which is a nice way to sort of ease into things. Um, so making a MarshWatch checklist is mostly for helping you to solidify your new knowledge or any knowledge that you're getting a refresher on, and just having that opportunity to be able to learn how to make a checklist and submit it into a data portal. And so, as I mentioned at the first session, I think MarshWatch has a lot of different regional differences. And so, of course, you're all listening to this one about Newfoundland and Labrador, but some of you do live in different areas. And so there could be a data submission portal that is a better fit for where you're living. But you can find that all on our MarshWatch website. The data submission portal is still under construction, but it should be done within the next few weeks. So by the time spring falls, it should be ready to go. So the first step that you'll need to take is to register for NatureCounts. And so you can go to the MarshWatch website, which is where you registered for this series, and then there will be a button that you can click, which is Submit Observations on NatureCounts. That will redirect you to the NatureCounts page. And NatureCounts is just Birds Canada's database where we keep all of our bird records. So there you'll either already have a NatureCounts login if you have done another program with Birds Canada in the past, like an owl survey, or a marsh monitoring, or there's a whole bunch of different other things, atlases, that sort of thing. So you can register with your existing account, like you could see on the bottom right. Or if you don't have an account, you can sign up and it's just for free, you just need login information. Once you've made an account or logged in, you'll need a way to record your data. So you can either do it on the NatureCounts app. So you can use an app on your smartphone, iPhones or Android, or you can download and print a paper data sheet, which you can find on the Newfoundland MarshWatch website under resources. And then the fun part is you get to go outside of course, and observe your birds and amphibians. So when you're looking and listening for birds, you can go, of course, to any wetland that you want for any amount of time that you want and identify what you can. So there's no prerequisite that you have to know, every single species before you get there. This is a good learning opportunity, and any data that you're collecting is a really great way for you to continue paying attention to learning. For listening to birds, what you'll need to do is count or estimate the number of individuals of each species. And then when you're listening for amphibians, that's going to be more in the evenings or early mornings, probably, when they'll be more active. And again, you can identify what you can. It's probably going to be mostly by sound because they're pretty tricky to find sometimes. And then rather than counting individuals, which is often very difficult for amphibians because they are hiding or across a large body of water, or behind a lot of vegetation. What amphibian scientists do is estimate the abundance with a call code. And so I'll go over what a call code is in a couple of minutes as well. A couple of other things that you always need to have written down when you are making a checklist is the start and end time, as well as the date and the location. So you need to be able to tie all of your observations with a place and a time. Otherwise, you just could say that you saw a robin or whatever, but it doesn't have any indication of where it was. And then the last thing you'll need to know is if it was a complete checklist. And a complete checklist is considered one where you are confident in all of your identifications and that you're reporting all the species that you knew. If it's incomplete, it just means that you either are not super confident in your identifications or you've excluded some species on purpose. Like, for example, you didn't identify all of the gulls or something that were out there, or you left out pigeons or something. Complete checklists, when we are talking about usable scientific data, are more reliable for being used in species abundance estimates and that sort of thing, because you know what is there and what is not there. And an incomplete checklist is only what you know is there, rather than knowing that you're eliminating all the things that weren't on the list. And then the last step would be, of course, to submit your observations. So you could do that either through the app or when you're writing on the paper data sheet. And so if you're submitting through the app, then if you have no service, your checklist will be saved as a draft and you could submit it when you're back in service. Or if you're using a paper data sheet, you can go to the MarshWatch main site and click on that Submit Observations on NatureCounts button, and it will bring you to the website submission. We'll just quickly look at what the app looks like so that you have a bit of an idea if you're interested in using it. Again, it's still under development, but in the next couple of weeks, it should be ready to go for Newfoundland and Labrador. And so if you draw your attention to the left side of the screen and the bottom of the left side where it says Create, Checklists, and Profile, on the Create section, that's where you would go to make a new list. And when you click on Create, it will automatically know the date, the time, and where you are. If you're not opening it where you are or when you are making that list, you can adjust any of those options. And then if you go to next, it will go to the checklist section where it shows you a list of species, and that will show you all the species that we've gone through during this webinar series and the ones that are going to be next week as well. And you'll be able to add in the number of individuals you saw of each species. You can click on the species name and add some more details. And then for the amphibians, you'll be able to put the call code, which again, we'll talk about in a second. And then it will have you also review your checklist at the end, just to make sure the date and time are right, the amount of time is right. And then that's also when you'd write if you made a complete checklist or not. So that's just a general overview of the app. On the website, there is also more a more in-depth tutorial that's made from my colleague in Saskatchewan. Okay, let's talk about amphibian call codes more in detail here. So as I mentioned, it's hard to identify, or sorry, hard to be able to count individuals of amphibians. So this is a general way of being able to estimate abundance, and it's widespread. It's used in a widespread manner amongst people who study amphibians. And so there's just three different call codes, basically going from least amount of individuals to most. Hmm. So for call code one, basically it's the least amount of individuals. You can actually count how many there are. And that's because there's space between the start of the calls. So one individual will be calling, or two individuals, or three, but you'll have space between them and you can tell who is who, and they don't start at the same time. So for example, that would sound like these spring peepers. So there was one peeper going the whole time basically, and then one other one joined in for a couple of calls in the middle. And sorry, I should have explained the little picture you can see is a spectrogram, so it's just visualizing the sound, and the recording plays along from left to right, and each of those really bright patches in the middle is one of the calls. Okay, so call code two is when there's some more individuals. Um, there's some simultaneous calling, so you can't tell all of the individuals apart, but there are some breaks in the chorus, so you can sort of estimate how many individuals there might be. So let's listen to this. There's around three or four in here, and a couple at the same time. So you can see how you can hear like three or four that are like beep 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 going through that recording. And so if you were estimating, you'd be able to know that's call code two, and there's probably around four individuals. And then we have call code three, and call code three is total madness. That's when you have a full chorus where all of the individuals are singing, and so it's basically a constant, continuous wall of sound. And so they're all overlapping, especially with things that have a longer call. You will basically just be able to hear that they are there, and you won't be able to tell how many individuals there are. So this is an example for the Spring Peeper. So that was call code three. And you can also see that in the spectrogram here that there's this big band of noise, but you can't actually pick out the individuals there either. So that's how we estimate the abundance for the amphibians rather than counting individuals. This is just so you can see what the paper data sheet looks like. It has all the information that you would need to make the checklist. And so you just write your observer, the location, the date and time that you started and ended, whether it's a complete or incomplete list. And then it has the list of species, all the ones that we've gone over in these webinars. So you could count the individuals, any other birds that you know, you could add them to the list. And then for the amphibians are on the bottom right there, you would put the call code. And then on the flip side, there's just some reference material for folks to remember. There's some sounds written out for those birds that are heard more often than they're seen. There's some key field marks written for the male ducks they are most likely to see. And then there's the reminder of those call codes for the amphibians at the bottom. And so, of course, the best way to learn is to go outside and to be with all these species that we've been practicing. And of course, it's not a requirement to go and do this or to submit data, but if you're interested in doing that, do let us know if there's a wetland near you that you think you might check out this spring, and we'd love to hear about it. And for this evening. So thanks for coming out again. We have one more session next week, so don't forget to come back out. We'll be covering a bunch more birds, the warblers and sparrows, I think. Um, and as always, you can watch our recordings on the website there. Feel free to email Catherine or I at that email address. And I would like to thank Wildlife Habitat Canada, as always, for providing funding for this series as well.